was, or A34, was a Leyland-built tank that appeared at the very end of the war, and it was really one of the best of all British tanks. Hard-hitting, accurate, very powerful. The gun is a 77mm weapon, which was an adaptation of the very successful 17-pounder. The tank's powered by a Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, which is a Meteor petrol engine, driving through its own transmission, and with Christie suspension for the road wheels. The one thing I noticed in the British tanks is that we always built our tanks with the engine and transmission at the back, so they drove the rear sprocket. And nowadays, almost everyone has adopted that layout. But the Comet was really the most successful of the wartime tanks, and it lasted mainly as a TA vehicle into the post-war years. There were some quite interesting actions involving Comets and Tigers at the end of the war, and the Comet came off best. It's the only British tank that could guarantee to do that, really. But reliable, solid, very powerful, probably the best, or almost certainly the best of our wartime designs. It has a novel type of turret, all welded armour, but with the mantlet, the front part of the turret moves up and down. The mantlet is protruding at the front, which you will see on some versions of Centurion, but not on earlier tanks. The other thing is it's armed with the 77, and it has two Bs of machine guns. One's in the front of the hull, and the other is coaxial with the main gun. And that's a phrase you don't hear every day, but a coaxial machine gun is on exactly the same lines as the main gun, goes up and down with it, and traverses with it. Now, Comet's been followed by Centurion. Although Centurion was designed during the war, it came out a little bit later. And the very early versions, of which we've got an example in the museum, were fitted with the British 17-pound 76.2mm gun. Then, by the time of the Korean War, it had gone up to a 20mm gun. Then they went up to a better 20mm gun with a fuming extractor, and ended up by this time with a 105mm gun of excellent accuracy. It's got the same Rolls-Royce engine as the Comet, and a very unusual cast turret that is served in top length. The tank following it, although it looks like, well, it is a Centurion really, is also known in Sweden, where it comes from, as the Stridsvagn 104. And it's a Centurion which has been improved in many respects, in terms of suspension, in terms of engine power and so on, and things that you perhaps wouldn't associate. But what it does prove is that Centurion has been able to be improved over the years. And as it went along, you had such a good basic tank that you could improve it with various developments as time went by. And that really is the mark of a good tank, I think. Centurion has a horseman-type suspension. We've done away with the Christie suspension then, but we always liked suspension units that bolted onto the sides of a tank rather than any integral suspension unit which was liable to be damaged if it went over a mile. Again, both tanks are equipped with main armament and a coaxial machine gun, though by this time the idea of the hull machine gun has been done away with. The driver sits with the front on the right, but he's by himself. He doesn't have anyone next to him. And then you have a three-man turret crew. A couple of things to notice about the guns on these tanks. You'll see about halfway along the barrel is a tubular container. Well, that's a fume extractor. The idea is that when you fire the gun, any fumes that would otherwise go back into the turret trickle into the fume extractor and are sucked out by the next round you fire, and so on and so forth. And the other thing is some of the guns are fitted with what's known as a thermal sleeve, and this normally takes the shape of a jacket of fabric which is wound around the gun it's designed to stop the gun suffering from overheating. In other words, a gun will actually warp. It's difficult to believe they're so strong, but a gun subject to a lot of heat will actually warp when it's fired, and the thermal sleeve will prevent that, which is something to count on, because even though the sort of deflection of the gun caused by the heating is only minimal, it has a devastating effect on the accuracy of the weapon that's used intensely. You'll see that the tanks also fitted what are known as bazooka plates in the side. These were devised to shoot, but when you weren't using handheld weapons against the tank, they were liable to explode. It's fitted with stowage boxes around the turret, partly for official bits and pieces and partly for the crew to keep their kit in. The engine and the transmission are at the back again, as they are on most British tanks, driving the rear sprocket. And although most of these tanks are fitted with metal tracks, you could find them sometimes fitted with rubber tracks, which we called hush puppies, which were less likely to damage the roads, and that actually counts for a lot of your training. And they're just going to pull up while they wait for the next vehicle to emerge. And here it comes. In fact, there's two vehicles going to go out now. These are both armoured recovery vehicles, or ARVs as they're known. The Centurion ARV followed the production of the Centurion tank, and it's basically the hull of Centurion with an armoured superstructure fitted with a winch. There's also a large earth anchor at the back. Now, the odd thing about the Centurion ARV was that it winched from behind, as all the earlier ARVs had done. You put down the winch, you extended the cable back and used that to haul your casualty forward. But it meant that the driver couldn't see what was going on. He had to take instructions from his vehicle commander, often someone standing in front of the tank. So it's a vehicle we actually use, both these ARVs, this and the church and the tanks we actually use around the museum, because they're so useful for hauling other tanks about. And the second vehicle in line is the Chieftain ARV. It's actually an ARV, an armoured repair and recovery vehicle. You can tell that because it's got a jib, a hydraulically operated jib mounted on the side of the hull. It's stowed at the moment, we can probably make it out there. The Chieftain has a winch, just like the Centurion, but this time winching to the front, and it uses the bulldozer blade as an earth anchor. So it means that when it's doing recovery, the driver can actually see what he's recovering, which makes life a lot easier for him. Otherwise, underneath all that, it's a basic Chieftain tank with the old Leyland engine in. It was a 6-cylinder, but vertically opposed 12-piston engine, and really quite an amazing engine in this day, derived from a wartime Junkers engine, in fact, and it gave a lot of trouble in the early days of Chieftain, but they've sorted it out now. Normally the ARV didn't carry any armament at all. Sometimes you fitted a machine gun just for immediate defence and that kind of thing, but invariably they were workhorses. They were operated by the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers rather than the Royal Armoured Corps, but are an integral part of an armoured regiment. So when these guys are working with the regiment, they feel themselves to be part of that regiment. But they're really absolute workhorses, solid, tough, capable of repairing any tank or dragging it away if they have to. Notice how the Chieftain has an edge of power on the Centurion. The drivers having to be very careful not to catch up. Just going over the bridge now, there's the Chieftain following the Centurion over the bridge. That's a standard tank bridge. That was also fitted with the versions of Centurion which were bridge layers. that could place a bridge like that and then move on. And that's usually, we use it here as a prop, but that's how it works. Now it has to be said that, all things considered, Chieftain, especially in its early days, was not a great success. It was a mechanical liability, and largely that was put down to the engine, although because they messed about so much with the engine, they didn't find out till afterwards the transmission was also giving trouble. So when we wanted to export Chieftain, we always had a problem. It didn't have a good reputation, and people fought shy of it. So a number of attempts were made to improve Chieftain's performance by putting in an upgraded engine. Not just being known as Comet, which will come from the Jordanian army, which has an improved power pack at the back of Rolls-Royce engine in place of the Leyland, which is a much better performance. Chieftain, though, in all its forms, is a very unusual tank. It was quite a milestone in tank development. To begin with, the driver, when he's got his hatch closed over his head, which he'd do when he was in action, is actually in a seat that folds back, so he's reclining rather as if he's on a sunbed and changing gear with his feet. He could sit upright, but only when he had the hatch open. You'd only do that in the open anyway. The paint scheme is part of the colour scheme adopted by the Jordanian army for their camouflage, and this is quite a rarity in this country now. There's probably only the one Khalid left, and here it is. It looks like a Chieftain from the front, but the minute you hear it, or the minute you see it from the back, you realise that it's actually a very different tank. Loads more power than the original Chieftain. Quite an effective rating. The other thing that's odd about Chieftain was the gun. It was a 120mm rifle gun, but it didn't fire what you would think of as a conventional ammunition with a conventional brass case. Instead, when you loaded that gun, you loaded the projectile first, then you loaded a fabric bag with the explosive in it, then you fitted a small cartridge case into the breech block and fired that way. The idea was that the projectile went whizzing out the front of the barrel to do whatever harm it could. The fabric case was completely consumed in the fire, and the little cartridge case you put in the breech block and fired, and you then took it out and did away with it and placed a new one in place. So that really was quite a development. It meant that one of the problems that we never think of when we look at a tank, you see a bigger gun and you think, oh, that's what we need. But a bigger gun means heavier ammunition, and if you could split the ammunition, Bob Andrews, who's the driver, who's at Rifle Brigade, Bill Miller, who's ex-War Rifle Brigade, who's commanding the tank. And they reckon between them, they've got 54 years of service. It's quite a record. 32 years each in the mechanized, or together in the mechanized infantry, and both were Cold War soldiers but in different roles. So they really have a tremendous amount of military experience between them, but not with tanks, mainly with trying to destroy tanks. So it probably does them good to learn how to drive one now. There goes Khalid. Now the next tank into the arena is Challenger 1. Challenger 1 was the tank originally built for the Shah of Iran when he sort of lost his job, and the Iranians then reneged on the deal, and we were left with loads of these tanks, or potentially loads of these tanks, and no market for them, and the British Army decided to step in and buy them. They were used in the First Gulf War, and this particular tank was commanded by So although it's still painted in colours pertaining to the First Gulf War, it lacks the initial armour that the tank had. Now, Charger 1 was the first tank we had equipped with trouble armour, and that gives the tank that strange angular look. You noticed when Chieftain went round, the turret was a casting. Well, inside, under all that laminate, the turret is very similar, in fact, but externally it uses a laminate armour, which really would defeat most kinds of incoming round, including armour piercing and heat and that sort of thing. That's what it was designed for. Has the same gun effectively as Chieftain, the 120mm, highly accurate and one of the best guns we've ever produced. And makes it quite an effective and very destructive vehicle. When the First Gulf War was on, these tanks earned tremendous reputation for reliability, and when Challenger 2 was introduced, they tended to rather denigrate Challenger 1 as being an interim tank, but in its day it was very, very good. And we're very pleased to have this example of a tank to show you. You see the extra fuel tanks at the back which are added. It's powered by what is now built by Perkins, but was originally a Rolls-Royce diesel. And it needs that extra fuel to cover its longer range running in desert environments. That really is an impressive sight to see that tank passing its way around. And you can hear the throaty roar of that engine. Like most tanks of that period, it still has a crew of 4, which is the driver at the front and then a 3-man turret crew, which consists of the loader, the gunner, and of course the tank commander, who occupies that cupola at the back. The gun is fully stabilised, so whatever you lock it onto as a target, it will remain on target, no matter what other evolution the tank goes out. That's up to the sea. There he is on the tabletop. He's the same as the other side, but a quick look at him. He's turning the gun so it doesn't dig into the ground. You won't believe this, but if you do that wrong, get it wrong, the gun digs in the ground and do a tremendous amount of damage. Besides, it could fill it with mud, which doesn't do it any good either. Steering is normally done by slowing one track and speeding up the other. And the degree that to do that dictates the radius of the curves it turns. That's how that works. The turret rotates fully. It will do a full 360 degrees. It won't unscrew itself. It'll go round and round.